What's going on, guys? Today we're going to talk about a fragrance from the house of Lorenzo Pazzaglia. I've acquired most of their collection, so we're going to walk through their scents one by one, scent by scent, and let you know kind of the theme of the house, which fragrances you should get your nose on first. Obviously, fragrance is subjective, but you guys seem to love my subjectivity, so I want to get the information out there and let you guys know if this particular fragrance today is something you should have your nose on. Strap up. Let's go for that ride. All right, welcome to the Scent Bubble. I am your host for the evening. Today, from the house of Lorenzo Pazzaglia, we have Sweet Xplosion. And for some reason, I'm not going to be spraying this fragrance today because I accidentally broke the glass off of the top when I was pulling the cap off. So after today, if I can't salvage it, I think I might have some 2 mLs on me somewhere around here. Empty bottles will try to preserve the juice. But I've already applied it on skin and on the test strip. It is quite juicy on the test strip. So we're going to just read some notes while this stuff dries down. Jeez, guys. This is a unisex fragrance. It seems to be leaning on vanilla, 3.79 out of 5 with 357 votes, so take that with a grain of salt. Described as an explosion of olfactory sensations of joy, of serenity, which lifts our spirits and isolates us from everyday life in a precious moment that brings us well-being. Sweet Xplosion is just this. So, joy and serenity. Okay. I feel like there's a difference between being poetic and being able to visualize a description of a scent and connect a scent memory or a story to a fragrance versus just fantasizing in a way that doesn't connect people to a fragrance in terms of the marketing. Like, if I could get the fragrance for free, I don't care what you tell me, I can make the connection. But if what you're telling me about the fragrance has to give me some kind of inclination as to whether or not I would even like that fragrance, then the more poetic you are, the more unhelpful you are to telling me what, I might like or not like about the fragrance in terms of buying it. They don't classify this scent as anything, but I can tell it's a heavily vanilla-based scent. It's called Sweet Xplosion, so that's all we have, an explosion of sweetness. I am so sorry for the cough. So I've applied it on skin, and I'm going to bounce between for an initial impressions on what we might expect. In the meantime, I want to get some information. Lorenzo Pazzaglia. Matter of fact, I might be able to even turn on voice here. Let's see if we could do that. Hey, so I want you to tell me very briefly about the fragrance house of Lorenzo Pazzaglia. When did they start as a brand? How many fragrances do they have released at this point? And what are some of the key themes behind their brand in terms of their approach to fragrances?
Lorenzo Pazzaglia is a niche fragrance house that really started gaining traction around the late 2010s. As of now, they've released a couple dozen fragrances, so it's still a relatively young but prolific house. Their key themes revolve around very bold, artistic compositions. They love rich, textured scents, often inspired by nature, food, and emotional landscapes. They're known for blending gourmand elements with unusual, evocative twists.
Okay, so known for blending gourmand elements with unusual twists. Okay, so I want to kind of, in this first opening scent that I'm reviewing, kind of establish a basis for quality, development, and if it connects to that kind of gourmand and experimental and heavy dose message. Now, I have a lot of these scents and I've gone through them. They seem to be a very rich and bold house in terms of their openings. Performance really shouldn't be an issue with most of the Lorenzo Pazzaglias, but you got to be careful when it comes to high performing fragrances. You have to make sure that The dry downs aren't generic synthetics, because just because a fragrance lasts long means nothing if what you got in that opening doesn't really transition to something of similar weight. We saw that with the House of Chris Collins, how some of those beautiful openings in perfumery kind of get super minimalistic and stripped down into the dry down, where the scent 20 minutes later doesn't feel like half of what the scent was in the opening. So that's kind of what I'll be evaluating. Now, this is Sweet Xplosion, and let's go ahead and dive right into this. So for me, I can't quite tell if it's like alcohol or coconut. Coconut, sometimes depending on how brash it is, can come off almost alcoholic. So there's either booze or coconut in this, but it just feels like that plus vanilla. It's ambery, it's warm, it's sweet. The sweetness is very kind of like old candy, like, you know, almost like an old piece of amber candy, you know, some like old candy you would have found from like the 80s or something, like a very generic flavor of sweetness. There's no like, it doesn't smell modern. It doesn't smell too old. It just kind of smells like a generic candy with kind of some slight spice elements. Not a lot of spice to speak of. A lot of amber. And that's really it. I wouldn't really call this a Sweet Xplosion. On my skin, I'm going to kind of have to reapply here because I'm not really getting a lot of the composition. Yeah, it feels very similar on skin. It's almost kind of like, I hate to say this, but it's kind of like this ambery piss stained vanilla. Like it almost has like a resin tint on the vanilla. And the vanilla is not, it's almost like a cheap ambery vanilla. It's not buttery. It's not dry and ashy. It's not ice creamish. It just is kind of more about amber with a little bit of vanilla. I'm really interested in kind of transitioning. I want to see something real quick. I really don't like the cover. I own 2 Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrances, and the bottles are quite, you know, hefty and substantial, and the cap's pretty cool. But that artwork is terrible. They need to go back to the drawing board. That looks like if somebody was to buy a vintage Lorenzo Pazzaglia from like the 70s, that was like an original design or something. So I can see why it got a 3.79 off the bat. This note pyramid looks amazing though. White honey, coconut. Okay, so it was coconut. It wasn't booze. White honey, coconut milk, lime, grapefruit, davana, argan, ylang ylang, broom, malva, taif, rose, vanilla, coffee, tonka bean, benzoin, patchouli, and musk. Yeah, I mean, that's what the vanilla is coming off ambery as. It's this kind of presence of kind of like a roasted coffee bean. Man, if I cough again, I'm turning the camera off. It's kind of this roasted coffee bean on the vanilla. That's what's creating kind of this like resinous, stained feeling on the vanilla. And then you do get kind of like a coconut milk citric top to it, but it feels 60-40, with the 60 being kind of this vanillic coffee stained stuff. It seems like a lot of elements are fighting, and it's kind of just getting congealed into this kind of 2 or 3 note type of fragrance. I don't really think all of these notes communicate what this scent is. I mean, as beautiful as this note pyramid is, I don't get a scent indicative of what beauty I see here on the screen. I mostly get like this by about 30%, and then mostly like this right here, tons of benzoin. You know, I'm curious. I did an not an experiment. I was just curious before I got into these, being that I've tried a lot of these scents, because again, longevity means nothing if it isn't quality. And I wanted to kind of educate myself. So I asked ChatGPT, like, what are some of the common synthetics used in fragrances, and give me the scent profile that they give off. So these are synthetic molecules and compounds that scientists make to give off the presence of a scent profile. and they're a lot cheaper to manufacture, and they're a lot more stable and consistent in terms of what they can produce. And so you can get loads of this stuff. And the problem becomes when you start to mix naturals and synthetics, which almost every perfumer does. Depending on the balance, sometimes people can lean on the cheaper, easier to get loads of synthetics and not on the naturals and the balance to give you a very natural smell. So you might get something very natural and photoreal in the opening, but then it just transitions to a fragrance where you're like, oh wow, they used just a buttload of ambroxan for the dry down, and they just jazzed up the top to give the illusion that this is a beautiful scent. I'm afraid that that might be the case with Lorenzo Pazzaglia, though they do make quality scents that feel above designer-ish, but I get the sense, at least from Sweet Xplosion, that it's an explosion of synthetics that have been masterfully masked with beautifully blended top notes. But then upon the dry down, the fragrance gets simpler. And I'm sure that they're going to have some hits and misses for this reason. Like some scents, you're going to be able to make out a certain synthetic that you're just like, that's annoying, and I don't like that dry down. And then others, the transition will be a little bit more seamless, and that might be a synthetic that is a lot smoother on your nose, and the magic has been not won, but they did the job. So here we have ambroxan, which comes off smooth, woody, musky, ambery, gives a clean, radiant skin-like modern freshness. A lot of people describe it as airy wood with a soft, salty warmth. We have ISOE Super, sheer, woody, velvety, dry, cedar-like. Hedione, which is fresh jasmine, airy, floral, luminous, slight citrusy. Galaxolide, clean, musky, laundry-like, soft, sweet, powdery. Cashmeran, musky, woody, spicy, warm, fuzzy. Calone, which is watery, marine, ozonic, melon-like. This is one of the classic aquatic synthetics. It often gives that ocean breeze or wet watermelon feel. Linenol, fresh floral, slightly citrus, lavender. Linenol acetate, bergamot, lavender freshness, soft, fruity, floral. Coumarin, sweet, tonka-like, hay-like, almondy, slight vanilla. Vanillin, ethyl vanillin, ethyl maltol, cotton candy, sugary, caramelized, jammy sweetness. Musk, ketone, aldehydes, methyl. There's just a ton, right? Like Javanol. And you know people use tons of these synthetics because they're so easy to acquire. Some cheaper than others, but you can get loads of this as opposed to like something that has, you know, messing with natural materials that are harder to find, less consistent, less stable, etc. But I get the feeling like you could kind of look at this list and guess which heavy synthetics have been just almost steroid injected into Lorenzo Pazzaglia fragrances. And the pyramid is always deceiving because we don't know what of these are synthetics and what of these are naturals, and we don't even know what percentage of what is in this. So really the note pyramid is marketing, in my opinion. Like they're not going to, like they could hypothetically just have injected buttloads of benzoin in this, and there's barely any of this really in terms of naturals, but they can just list this if they even can kind of make that out in smell. You know, fragrance making is very much wizardry. Is benzoin in this list? Let's just look. And I apologize if my son is in the background. Let me see. What about benzoin? I'm just curious. Benzoin is a really important material in perfumery, thought of as a resin note rather than just a synthetic. It's sweet, warm, balsamic, resinous, vanillic, slight powdery, slight spicy. So just like based off that description, I feel like 90% of this fragrance is a buttload of benzoin. So that's just something to keep in mind. I mean, this isn't a bad thing, guys. Fragrance companies do this all the time. So I don't just want to pick out Lorenzo Pazzaglia as the sheep for this conversation. But what I want to say is that the Pazzaglia house is known for super bold, robust, long-lasting fragrances, and the notion or the hunch you might get is to automatically assume like, oh man, it's a higher quality brand because they somehow managed to make their fragrances last long, when in reality it could just be that some of your most common synthetics have just been royally injected into the fragrance, and they've masterfully captured top and heart notes to a point where they can make it seamless and still feel niche. And like I said, in my experience so far, I think we're going to arrive at some scents that develop a lot better than others, and others that just kind of fall flat into a kind of 2-3 note composition that's quite boring and quite cheap smelling. I think that's the case with this scent profile. And, you know, shout outs to me for the fact that, like, I think I ran into this house in a time that wouldn't really benefit them as a house, because had I smelled Lorenzo Pazzaglia's like even a year ago, I might have thought extremely highly of the brand, you know, just off the bat, like, oh wow, beast mode, lush, you know, rich scents to the nose off the spray. But as I'm smelling these dry downs and it's getting quite generic, and I'm just seeing the pattern of what many fragrances do, I'm kind of like, oh, okay. I think easy, actually, let me go through some usual suspects. I'm going to have some great alternatives for you on this episode. Again, since this is the start of walking through fragrances from this house, it's going to be a little bit more in depth, so you guys kind of have some information as I walk through some of the others a lot quicker. So seasons, it leans fall, winter, cold weather. This fragrance benefits from a breeze. Age-wise, I do think it's perfectly unisex. I think it leans 30 and down, like it's trying to be mature in the opening, but it's very playful. In fact, that's another key characteristic of a lot of Lorenzo fragrances, is I feel a lot of them have this kind of overarching playfulness, even if they are mature. So they feel fun, hip, and cool. Performance, I don't think is going to be an issue. 6 hours easy, probably north of 8 hours. Crazy sillage, 3-4 feet of sillage minimum. Very projective, heady fragrances. Sprays on these, you can go anywhere between 4 to 8 depending on the season. I think 4 sprays will do you just fine if you don't like heavy spraying. But if you want the fragrance to last all day, 6 to 8 should go 12 hours plus, I would imagine. And the reviews seem to correlate with that. Price point is about $200 if I'm not mistaken, but I think in the discount realm you can get Lorenzo Pazzaglia's most of them for around the $150 price point on an average. As a score, I'm going to be honest, this is very average for me. Like, I might even give it a 6 just in terms of my expectations for a fragrance. But, the robustness, the richness, the longevity, the fragrance as an experience, I'm just going to chalk it down as a 7 for me. It's very average, even though it's very beast mode average. I think of 2 very easy alternatives when it comes to a fragrance that includes lots of vanilla and spice, as well as, amber vanillas and almost has chocolatey elements due to the coffee and kind of the idea of coffee with a citrus milky top. I think of 2 fragrances from the same house. Day 3 fragrance is Philosophia, which has a kind of, soft, rich chocolate oud emphasis. Parts of this fragrance push me in that area, as Philosophia is a much better alternative to this for the same price point. You do only get 50 ml, but I think the Lorenzo Pazzaglias are 50 ml as well, if I'm not mistaken. And Day 3's, what fragrance is it? Doggone it, you guys are going to make me look it up now. Day 3. La Tacita de Café. That's what it is. The warm, spicy, sweet, citric topped coffee, ambery, brown sugar, vanilla experience. I do think La Tacita de Café is more mature, more robust, more stable in its transition and longevity. And it's a better complex smell than this that gives you the richness of coffee, the beauty of vanilla, and kind of that dark mood, but bright, fun, crisp Dominican coffee kind of feel. I think that's the better alternative to this fragrance. since this is a 7. I think La Tacita de Café truly is probably like a 9 out of 10 bare minimum. So that's the easy alternative of an equal price point. And then if you like more of the kind of chocolate vanillic experience, rich dark chocolate, soft, ambery feel, Philosophia is also a wonderful option. But I do think La Tacita de Café is the one-to-one parallel between these two that did it better. Yeah, 7 out of 10 for me. Did I miss anything in my analysis? Nope, we covered everything. Again, this was Lorenzo Pazzaglia's Sweet Xplosion. So far, I admire the rich and robust nature of the fragrances, but I think these are going to be hit or misses. Some of them they're just going to have done way better, and some scent profiles are going to benefit from a giant injection of synthetics. Again, I don't know if that's what they do, but when I read through some of these synthetics, it's like, oh, that's that. And I mean, we can even see in the description that they listed benzoin as a base note. Feels like it has a lot of benzoin in it, but that's just me. And that isn't always indicative of something bad. It just can be indicative of, well, this base is entirely benzoin with a little bit of sugar and spice splashed into it, which can come off very generic and can imitate a lot of fragrance styles that you have tried before. Again, this was Sweet Xplosion, 7 out of 10. Hope this review was helpful for you guys. Like, comment, subscribe. More importantly, turn on that notification bell. Join the free Discord that's in the description below. And I hope you guys have a blessed rest of your week. I got to get out of here, but I'm going to throw 2 videos up per usual for you. And let me know in the comment section if you have any more questions, okay? Hope you guys have a great rest of your night. Peace.